and welcome to Business Daily. I'm Ijun in Seoul. Let's get started with a glimpse of today's highlights. Prosecutors recommended a 12-year prison sentence for Samsung heir Jae-yong on Monday, with the final verdict set to be delivered on August 25th. The local real estate market is already feeling the impact of the Moon Jae-in government's latest real estate measures announced last week. It designates several overheated areas as speculation zones, imposing stricter regulations on real estate transactions. We'll sit down with an expert to talk about this. But first, despite a 9-month rally in exports, Korea's economic recovery is not as solid as it seems, with production falling. According to a report released by the Ministry of Strategy and Finance on Tuesday, the country's industrial output in the mining and manufacturing sectors fell 0.2% all month in June. The drop was attributed to inventory adjustments in semiconductors and lower output in petroleum refining. However, the report says Korea's economic recovery is likely to gather steam in the second half of this year on further export gains and improving consumer sentiment. Korea remains the world's largest exporter of goods to China, but its share has been shrinking since the start of Beijing's retaliation over Seoul's decision to deploy a THAAD anti-missile battery. Data from the Korea International Trade Association shows Korea's share of China's total imports came to 9.4% in the first half. Now, this marks the first time the figure has fallen to single digits since 2014. Japan and the U.S. are also closing the gap, trailing Korea's share by less than 1 percentage point. Semiconductors still lead Korea's exports to China, growing nearly 50% on year, but shipments of auto parts and handsets have fallen, reflecting their dwindling market share in China. Capital spending in the sizzling semiconductor sector is set to jump by double digits this year before receding in 2018. That is the outlook released by U.S. market tracker Gartner, which forecasts a 10.2% jump in spending this year, amounting to nearly $78 billion. That's also a significant markup from its previous 2017 estimate of 1.4% from the previous quarter. Gartner attributed the surge in spending to an unexpected shortage of NAND flash chips in Q1, as well as strong demand for memory and leading-edge logic. The market tracker sees a cyclical downturn in 2018 and 2019 before spending re-enters positive territory in 2020. Prosecutors have recommended a 12-year prison sentence for the vice chairman of Samsung Electronics, Jae-yong. He is accused of bribing former President Park Geun-hye and her confidant Choi Soon-sil in a corruption scandal that led to Park's impeachment. Our Lee Ji-won has this report.
South Korea's largest conglomerate, Samsung did not release an official statement on the special prosecutor's request that its de facto leader Lee Jae-yong be sentenced to 12 years in prison on bribery and embezzlement charges. But it did seem to be appalled by the heavier-than-expected sentence recommendation. Just after Special Prosecutor Park Young-soo's independent counsel team demanded the jail sentence at Lee's final trial hearing at the Seoul Central District Court on Monday, the group and its executives simply said that they had nothing to say and are waiting for the verdict to be handed out. The Samsung heir allegedly gave or planned to give a total of $38 million to former President Park Geun-hye and her longtime confidant Choi Soon-sil in various forms, including donations to Choi's organizations and sponsoring the equestrian training of Choi's daughter. The independent counsel believes the money was offered in exchange for support from Park and the state-run National Pension Service, a major stakeholder in Samsung C&T, to vote in favor of its merger with another branch of Samsung Group, Jail Industries. The strategy helped Lee become the largest shareholder of the newly merged entity, which in turn holds a controlling stake in the group's most important business, Samsung Electronics. Besides bribery and embezzlement, Lee is also charged with diverting assets overseas, concealing illicit financial gains, and committing perjury. But Lee's lawyers say that there is no link between Lee's support for Choi's entities and daughter and the merging of Samsung's two affiliates. They also argue that there were no illegal processes involved in the transfer of assets overseas. While the verdict is set to be delivered on August 25th, the ruling is likely to have a critical impact on the ongoing trials of former President Park and her confidant Chae. Lee-ji-won, Business Daily.
Another important court date is scheduled next week, where Kia Motors could end up paying billions of dollars worth of compensation to its workers following a class action lawsuit. Our Kim Ji-yeon has more on the case.
The verdict of Korea's biggest wage class action lawsuit will be unveiled next Thursday after it was first filed in 2011. Some 27,000 labor union members sued Kia Motors, a corporate cousin of Korea's largest automaker Hyundai Motor, for withholding overtime pay and bonuses. The focus of the case is on whether or not bonuses should be included in workers' regular wages, an important factor that also determines their severance pay. If Kia Motors loses the court battle, it may cost the firm up to $2.7 billion in wage compensation.
The amount in damages is larger than Kia Motors' total profits from last year. The verdict will have a considerable impact and force the company to reevaluate its business practices.
According to the Federation of Korean Industries, 86 similar lawsuits regarding unpaid wages are pending in local courts. Some are expecting a landmark ruling that would empower labor rights under Korea's family-run conglomerates known as the Chaebol. Others, however, argue a ruling in favor of the union would hamstring the already sluggish local auto industry and thus the overall economy. Auto exports have already plunged 33% during the first 5 months of 2017 compared to the same period last year.
If the court rules that bonuses are part of regular wages and not something that's to be negotiated between employers and labor unions, it could worsen business conditions in the auto industry.
Korea's auto exports to emerging markets, which make up more than half of its total outbound shipments, have waned, largely due to low oil prices weighing on those economies. Also playing a part are sluggish exports to China, which is retaliating against Korea's THAAD deployment, and the U.S., where consumer preferences have tilted away from Korean automakers. Kim Ji-yeon, Business Daily.
A closer look at the assets of Korea's wealthy citizens show that more than half are made up of real estate. In fact, their real estate holdings on average were nearly 11 times higher than the average for all Korean households. Our Lee Jae-yong has more.
Commercial properties, redeveloped apartments, and shopping centers. These are some of the most popular property assets that Koreans prefer to invest in. This as real estate still remains the primary means of making Korea's wealthy even wealthier. According to the Korea Wealth Report released by KB Financial Group Research Institute, 52.2% of the rich's wealth portfolio is made up of property assets, up from the previous year's 51.4%. Since 2013, Korea's wealthy, or those who own more than $891,000 in financial assets, had reduced the holding of real estate assets. But the trend had reversed early this year thanks to the booming local housing market amid active housing redevelopment projects. In fact, the value of real estate assets held by Korea's wealthy averaged roughly $2.5 million for each individual as of last year, which is about 11 times higher than the overall average for all Korean households. As of 2016, the number of Koreans in the uppermost income bracket reached 242,000, up nearly 15% over the span of 1 year and up 70% compared to 5 years ago. Lee Joo-young, Business Daily.
So it's been about a week since the Moon Jae-in government announced a second round of real estate measures aimed at cracking down on speculative buying. And the local real estate market is already feeling the effects. Take a look.
President Moon's latest real estate measures have designated all districts in Seoul as speculation zones subject to tighter mortgage regulations. Specifically, they target those who own multiple residences by levying higher transfer taxes on properties they sell. The debt-to-income ratio for first-time homebuyers and low-income households, meanwhile, were fixed at a higher ceiling of 50% to lower their entry barriers. With such measures, the government is hoping to deter wealthy multiple homeowners from monopolizing the real estate market while making properties more affordable for the average citizen. And the impact of the measures are already being felt in the local market, with both demand and asking prices on properties falling since they were announced. There are also concerns that real estate measures may dampen the domestic economy, with construction having been one of the main drivers of Korea's economic growth in recent months.
And to give us more insight on this, Professor Young Jun-suk from the Catholic University of Korea joins us in the studio today. So good to see you.
Happy to be here.
So many are saying that the measures put forth by the government last week were quite tough. So at this point, we're wondering, what is the situation like right now in regards to the country's local real estate market?
Okay, well, the prices have been really changing a lot. Government declares the Seoul area as well as the Sejong City area as speculative areas, and the prices in those markets have been falling drastically, 300 million won in some cases.
Wow.
Now, apparently there's sort of a side effect from that, which is that the places which are not covered by the speculative zone, for example, Busan City, real estate on those places seem to be going up. But right now, things seem to be a lot in fluctuation. People who have multiple housing in Seoul or Sejong seems to want to get rid of it as fast as possible, or wait and see what's going on. So the number of transactions seems to have fallen.
Now, how does this latest package of measures compare to that of previous governments, as well as the Moon Jae-in government's first round of real estate measures announced back in June?
Okay, well, a lot of people are comparing this to the policies used in Roh Moo-hyun administration. A big difference between the two administrations' policies is that Roh Moo-hyun depended more on taxes. Actually, property taxes, I should say. During the Roh Moo-hyun administration, they did have some restrictions on resale. They did have higher taxes on limits on borrowing. But the big difference was that if you owned apartments above a certain amount in the bubble area, so-called Bubble 7, which includes the Seoul Gangnam area, you had to pay higher property taxes. But that not only affected the very rich or the people who own multiple housing, but also middle-class people. I happen to be one of them, actually.
Okay.
So you should. I'm not completely a disinterested party here, but so that created a lot of resistance against that type of tax. So this time around, they're staying away from property taxes. They're aiming more at people who own multiple houses or people who buy and sell rights to apartments which are not yet quite finished. So in order to do that, they've increased what could be called a capital gains tax. Whenever you buy or sell apartments, you have to pay taxes to the government. And for people who own multiple housing, more than 2 or 3 housing, they raise the tax so that any gains you made from that transaction, the difference between the buying price and the selling price, the government can tax between 50% and 60%.
Okay.
So that's, I think, the big difference between the Roh Moo-hyun administration and the Moon Jae-in administration policy. The difference between the June policy and the August policy is that in the June policy, they didn't really have this capital gains tax. And because the capital gains tax here is so drastic and it's targeted at people who own multiple housing, that I think that's scaring off a lot of potential buyers.
Now, the market is also watching to see if the Bank of Korea will join the efforts by raising interest rates.
Okay, well, the core reason why we have this problem in the first place, why there's frequent bubbles in certain areas of Seoul, is that there's excess demand for housing in these areas because there's a lot of people who want to live in Seoul area. So, but not enough apartments to go around. So excess demand is first factor. Second factor is low interest. If you know the Korean market, there's something called jeonse. Instead of paying a rent every month, you give the owner a certain amount, large amount of money,
lump sum deposit.
Lump sum, and the owner takes the interest as de facto rent. Now, the problem is when the interest rate falls, as it has right now, you have to raise the lump sum in order for the house owner to get a certain amount, fixed amount of rent. So right now, the jeonse price is very close to the selling price. So a lot of people are saying, well, why don't I just get an apartment, put 전세 out. That'll finance about 80% of the price of the apartment. I only have to put up about 20%, sometimes by borrowing from the bank. So that's been driving up a lot of demand. It's also making some rich people buy multiple housing, and government has made this the target of their actions. But even though the low interest rate is one of the key factors here, interest rate is a very blunt tool. It not only affects the real estate market, it affects investment, other types of consumption, international capital flows, foreign exchange rate, which in turn affects exports. So you really don't want the monetary policy to be driven by real estate. Real estate policies are much better dealt with using fiscal policy, which can be targeted just to the real estate sector, like taxes, and regulatory policy. So I think the Bank of Korea, well, they may want to raise the interest rate anyway, especially if the U.S. Fed raises it. But to raise it with the just with the real estate market in mind is, I think, very dangerous, and it should only be done as a last resort.
But then if it does end up raising interest rates amid tightened regulations in the property market, then what impact will all this have on the Korean economy? Okay, well, a lot of people are concerned that this will shrink the construction services, right? Because, well, if the apartment prices fall, there's not enough profit in it for a lot of these construction companies, and a lot of growth is driven by construction services. I think Korea has to make a choice. It can either try to burst the real estate market bubble, which has been a problem for 20, 30 years, or it can try to use the construction industry to reinvigorate the economy. But I think trying to use the construction industry to reinvigorate the economy right now is a bit dangerous because, well, in the National Assembly, they don't really like the fact that Seoul is getting all these apartments because they don't like the fact that Seoul is absorbing all these people from their own provinces in the countryside. Right. So they may insist that if you're going to build more apartments in Seoul, you have to build more apartments in their own provinces. Now the problem is we have excess demand for housing in Seoul area, but excess supply almost everywhere else. Right. So that may increase the distortion even further. So I think, in a sense, perhaps we need more supply in Seoul area, definitely, but trying to reinvigorate the entire National Assembly using construction as a tool, I think that should be given some benign neglect. Now, what kind of impact did the real estate measures have on the Korean stock market? And also, what's your general outlook from here on out? Okay, well, the stock market doesn't seem to be doing that well. I think that disappointed a lot of people who expected the money from the real estate market to flow into the stock market. I think it's too early to see that effect, even if it does exist. A lot of people are just holding off to see what will happen because a lot of the announced policies, it needs to go through the National Assembly to change it into a law. So a lot of people are holding off. And then the second problem is that one thing that we found out since the global financial crisis is that sometimes you don't go for the best investment, you go for the least bad investment. Right. So if the stock market doesn't pick up, say in the next few months, then people may decide, even with all these regulations, even with these high taxes, well, real estate is the best place that I can put into. At least I can minimize my losses. So we'll have to wait and see what kind of, how the law passes through and how the stock market does before the real estate money goes in to see what really happens. All right, we'll keep our eyes on those. Thank you so much for coming in today. Thank you. Convenience stores here in Korea are springing up rapidly, overtaking Japan in the number of stores relative to its population. The country now has one store for roughly 1,500 people, 1.5 times more than that of Japan. However, average revenues per store lags far behind at only around 1/4 compared to its neighboring country. According to industry watchers, the number of convenience stores is likely to increase over the next 4 to 5 years. More than 3,000 new stores have already opened in Korea so far this year, despite profits shrinking in an overcrowded market. Convenience stores have seen Q2 operating profits fall 5.8% on year, and profits are expected to become even slimmer with Korea's minimum wage set to increase next year. The need for clean, renewable energy has become more urgent than ever before. A growing number of people are now trying to convert their farmland into solar farms, generating power instead of produce. Farmers are reaping many benefits, but are also facing many side effects and challenges as well. Our Oh Jung-hee reports.
Standing at the center of the Korean government's nuclear-free, low-carbon energy plan is a need to increase the production and supply of renewable clean energy from the current 4.8% to 20% by 2030. Solar farming, producing electricity at farms that aren't in use, is a much-discussed possible solution. Because 10% of Korea's farmland is left idle and installing solar panels doesn't harm the farm's ecosystem, farms are quickly becoming places of electricity generation. Additional profit from selling solar energy also helps farmers earn more.
After a year of tough work, farmers make $2.5 per 3 square meters of farmland. That minus spending on fertilizer, personal, and more leaves only $0.5. That's why the government provides them with subsidies and buys rice for them. But selling solar energy makes $50 to $60 and leaves $20 as net profit.
Rising interest in solar farming can be seen south of the Korean mainland on Jeju Island. Last year, Jeju came up with a new project to turn some of the island's tangerine fields into solar energy production sites to increase the island's energy independence and to reduce the size of tangerine farms, which have seen their profits decline recently. Participating farmers were to close down parts of their farms where they would install solar panels. The project is on a temporary halt now, but it's seen as an innovative measure to produce energy by using surplus resources. But as solar farming means producing solar energy instead of food crops, concerns have been raised over food security. To find a more effective solution, a study is underway by one of Korea's public power corporations to enable simultaneous production of solar energy and rice.
This farm has solar panels installed quite high above the ground, distanced from each other, to minimize their impact on the growth of rice plants below.
Farmer Chung Gi-seop manages 2 farms of the same size, but one with solar panels and the other without. It's been a month and a half since he planted the rice crops, and he says he can already see that installing solar panels above rice plants doesn't necessarily lead to a large drop in total yield.
I was really suspicious at first because installing solar panels would make shade. I was worried. But as I now compare the rice plants below the solar panels with those not under the panels, they both grow well. In fact, those under the solar panels grow better.
The farm fulfills its role in producing sufficient electricity, though the amount could differ depending on weather each day. The target amount is 350 kilowatt hours a day, and the farm produced over 500 kilowatt hours of electricity the day before we had visited.
All plants have a light saturation point. For rice is 70%. That means only 70% of the sunlight helps rice plants to grow, and the excess sunlight doesn't help much. So our idea is to use the remaining 30% to produce solar energy.
Solar farming can be an attractive option for farmers, but it could cause problems if it draws in too many farmers and too much land, possibly leading to food security concerns and even conflicts between those farmers who earn more through solar farming and those who don't. So experts suggest learning from Japan's case, letting farmers continue with solar farming only if they maintain their crop yield at over 80% of their original yield. And regional bodies should also play a pivotal role to bring the benefits of solar farming equally to everyone.
If solar farming is to work, then the residents and the regional bodies will all have to participate. Residents should invest together, and the regional governments will have to provide direct or indirect financial assistance to make sure they and the residents receive a fair amount of profits.
Solar farming is only in its early stages in Korea, and the Korean government is considering allowing the building of renewable energy facilities at farming-only areas. A clear plan on that is wanted as soon as possible to maximize the benefits of solar farming and to tackle any concerns. 오정희 Business Daily.
And that wraps it up for today, but we'll be back tomorrow with more of the day's top business stories, so don't forget to tune in then. Thanks for watching and see you soon.